turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.
Oh my goodness!
2 on the clock.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Buzzer, the Basketball Fix podcast where we get into awesome basketball stuff. It's what we do, isn't it, boys? I've got Josh Higgins, resident NBL expert with me, and Jeremy Dark. Last week was a Supercoach stud. This week is a Supercoach dud.
Oh, that's
Boys,
harsh,
how are
buddy.
we?
That's harsh.
Very, very harsh. Well, I guess you have to cop that on the chin, mate. And I guess everyone, if you want to listen to the NBL Supercoach wrap-up and I guess reactions as well, we'll get stuck into that pretty soon. But, yeah, it's a bit of a harsh one, I think there, mate. But looking forward to it. It's been an interesting week in the NBL world, and I'm looking forward to touching on a few different topics. But, yeah, I head off to America tonight, so I'm looking forward to that, to say the least, boys.
I'm not a super coach dud. I think you've come out and been extremely harsh and hurt my feelings right from the get-go. I'm probably still ahead of Josh, I think, in the overall rankings, but we'll talk about that on our super coach show. I'm doing all right. Thanks for asking.
I seem to have hit a very, very big nerve there. But, boys, there has been a lot of stuff
I'll give you
happening in
big
the
nerve, buddy.
A lot of stuff happening in the NBL world over the last few days. Let's take a quick minute to look back at round 3 and see and talk about this, dissect some of this stuff that's going on. We've had two teams that have kind of blasted up the standings in Cairns and Adelaide, having massive wins. Josh, I want to go to you first, mate. How do you react to these two teams suddenly becoming great?
Yeah, I think it all just comes back to, obviously, when we're touching on the NBL world, we're always touching on, how, I guess, close the NBL is as a whole, and I guess how close that all these teams are as well, because we've seen the Adelaide 36ers and the Cairns Taipans both this week come out and really assert themselves as, I guess, relatively strong teams in the NBL. Now, I've been on record very, very often, I guess, with Adelaide 36ers and touching on how dysfunctional they are and how horrible they're going to go in NBL 25. But when we look at, obviously, this season, it's been a great start for them so far. They've had 2 major wins. They got their first win against Southeast Melbourne Phoenix and then obviously knocked off the Illawarra Hawks as well, arguably the hottest team in the NBL. But I want to touch on quickly the Illawarra Hawks game because it really did come down to a complete and utter shootout when we look at it realistically as well. So they ended up winning that game 102-100. Both teams are relatively poor from the three-point line. The Adelaide 36ers shot at 37% to the Illawarra Hawks' 34%. But, when we're looking at obviously this particular game, there was one key matchup that I think really kept both of these teams in the game. That was Kendrick Davis taking on Trey Kell as well. And I think Kell's had an MVP start to the season so far, and obviously when we're looking at Kendrick Davis, yeah. When we're looking at Kendrick Davis, he's obviously had, I think, a really good start and copped some unfair criticism. But, realistically, look at this last week. He absolutely dominated both of the teams that he did play in as well. So it was a really important week for them, I guess, to start to get the ball rolling. And I think there's a lot of questions going forward with this franchise to see if they can keep up this pace when obviously the eventual does happen with Montrezl Harrell leaving for Jarrell Martin. But when we're looking at this week in particular, they had a massive week. And I guess we'll start to call the Adelaide domination for round number 3.
Just on the shooting quickly, so that 37%, if they were shooting that every game, that would still put them at 3rd in the league for three-point shooting. They're still 48.9% on the season, the best three-point percentage of the NBL. So, and I've been on this for weeks now saying they need to shoot more threes. That's where they have their best attack, and finally they're getting there. Even in this game with a lower percentage than what they have been over the first couple of games, they still blasted their opponents with the 3-ball. Jez, you looked at Kendrick Davis from the Adelaide 36ers, and Olgun Ulich's tweet has kind of bitten him in the ass.
Yeah, didn't it that age very poorly, very quickly for
Could have happened to a better bloke, could it, boys?
Right? I mean, Olgun, he does great work, but he obviously sparked something with Kendrick Davis, and he absolutely dominated last week. Like, I don't know, I got hurt more than I wanted to from Kendrick Davis as well because I didn't captain him in Supercoach, which was the biggest mistake I made in a week, which is a lot saying coming from me, really. But yeah, he was just unbelievable. He was absolutely on fire. He dominated, and it is that like that you touched on the shooting percentage. If you look at sort of how Sydney work, it's really similar. Sydney just shoot a lot. Like they shoot more threes than 3-point attempts than any other team, and it's just a matter of playing the numbers. A bit like you, Ryan, when you're out at the club, you play the numbers, get out there, attack as much as you can, and you'll finally drop one. But like that's sort of how you got to go. Like, and especially in this league, it feels like it is becoming a 3-point league, and being able to drop threes no matter how many times you're shooting, I think is extremely important. And obviously with Adelaide having a very good percentage and have the players to be able to drop a lot of threes, it's definitely the way that they have to play and have to attack. So, and I think another big point out of this weekend for Adelaide was Isaac Humphries. He was nowhere in the first two games for Adelaide. Like, I think he had his total stats in the first two games were 5 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists in the whole first two games. And then all of a sudden he comes out and just absolutely goes off. He had 22 points, 6 rebounds and 2 assists against Southeast Melbourne. And then he had 17 points and 8 assists against Illawarra. So the big talking point from those first 2 weeks with Adelaide was definitely, okay, has Hurrell come in and just taken all the limelight and pulled all the confidence out of Humphries, who was supposed to be their number one big, especially how he ended last season. And it's like, all right, how do we get these two guys to work together and produce together? And they certainly did that last weekend, and look what it did for them. They went from an 0-2 team to a 2-2 team, if that's right. Or maybe they even snagged a win in the first. Where are we? Adelaide, 2-2. So yeah, that's obviously that's key for them. They're shooting threes, and then they're getting that sort of dual attack of down low, being able to cause problems to open up the floor for their shooters and give them more time. So that's key in this league, I think, is having both, so you can play whatever strategical offensive tactic you need to do and still score points either way if one part of that gets shut down. So yeah, Adelaide all of a sudden are a threat, huh?
Yeah, definitely. And guys, the Ford factory also in full effect. Cairns Taipans, like I said in the beginning, shooting up the standings off the back of Taron Armstrong. Josh, this guy has missed the first couple of games, and we spoke about how important he was going to be in the preseason, and we were correct.
Yeah, definitely. I think when we look at the Cairns Taipans, we've really got to look at it through two different lenses in a sense. Now, at the start of the season, they were my team who I thought would just scrape into the 6, which is a bit of an increase in what we saw last season. I think they had a bit of a more all-rounded team last year. When we look at obviously Tajir McCall and obviously Pat Miller as well, who are their 2 star imports. But these 3 imports they've gone out and gotten, I think that they've really targeted good guys and good people, and they're obviously getting that now on the basketball court as well. So Rob Edwards is an absolute shooter. He's done really, really well. I think he sometimes forces too many shots. I think that's one of his sort of queries right now that he's got to really assess at the moment. He's really picking his shot, whether it's driving to the basket and looking for a better option on the perimeter or even inside as well instead of forcing it up, or even some of the 3-point shots that he forces up as well needs to be relaxed a little bit. But that's all going to come with playing more with Taron Armstrong, because we know as the season goes on, Taron is going to take more control of this team and will put those people in their places as well. But they've started incredible. When we look back to their first game against the Tasmanian JackJumpers, and a lot of people would have said this same thing here. You don't score on the Tasmanian JackJumpers. Well, the Cairns Taipans absolutely put that to bed and scored 53 points in the first half and kept the Tasmanian JackJumpers at 37 points as well. And they did it in a number of different ways. They shot 42% from the three-point line compared to the JackJumpers' 27%, and they had 52 points in the paint. They did it everywhere possible as well. So they just look like a really, really strong team. And, when we're touching on the forward factor, it was a bit of a thing I came up with last season with obviously the merry-go-round of the big men. Well, that's still in full effect, but I think that these three big men that they've got going around, and obviously Tanner Groves, Kyron Galloway, and you could even chuck in AK Gack as well. They're very, very versatile players. So you've obviously got outside scoring, you've got inside presence. So whatever they need in that particular game, you're still going to see the merry-go-round. So if we're touching on Supercoach stuff, stay clear of the Cairns Taipans big men again. But in terms of obviously this team, there's a lot of depth. There's a lot of additions to this team that I'm really, really liking. And they've got a chance to really go down as a team that could really threaten for an NBL championship, I think, coming out of the season as well, because they've got their three guys flying right now, and they're only going to get better as the season goes on. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do in NBL 25.
Well, they were one of the teams that I said were a sneaky chance to maybe clip a high spot here. Now, Jez, the Perth Wildcats, what happened to what's happening to the Wildcats this season?
Yeah, I don't know. It all just sort of fell apart. I think, I don't know, to be fair, they were very disrupted this week. I think not having Windler play and Ty Webster sort of obviously throws things out. You lose sort of those two guys. I think Windler, you lose your backup and your four. So I think Windler and Ty Webster were working sort of really well together those first couple of weeks, and moving into that whole point guard perimeter tactic that they had running there, and it was working well. And then you take two guys out of that, and all of a sudden you got Bryce Cotton left all alone, and he suffered, didn't he? Like, he had one of the toughest rounds of his NBL career over the last sort of few years anyway, that since I've been sort of diving in. It just felt like he was nowhere. He couldn't get involved. It was just so easy to shut down when you don't have that other threat up there. And it just didn't seem to work. I think Pepper was really off he started the first game and against Melbourne, and he was just a little bit off, missed a couple of early shots. And I think when you have a kid like Pepper that's in his rookie season and you blast a bit of confidence, I think I think that really has an adverse effect, and then it just sort of slowed everything down. So I think we got a little bit out of Pinder, which was what you wanted as a Perth Wildcats supporter, especially when Cotton is struggling. But yeah, I think it is really, really, it was a really just tough weekend for them. And I'm not so worried personally. I think they're going to have a lot more to give. It was just one of those rounds, and I'm definitely not writing them off as a top contender just yet.
Josh, Jez touched on Bryce Cotton, and he has had a rough start to the season. Are teams getting better at defending him, or is he in a bit of a form slump?
I don't think it's really either, to be honest with you. I think it's more the fact that the Perth Wildcats aren't getting him the shots that he used to get. So, I don't know if there's that big man who's not afraid to come out there and set that hard screen, because all we know that Bryce only needs a couple of centimetres of space and he'll put the ball up, and 9 times out of 10, that thing will hit. But when you're not getting that space, you're not really getting able to sort of hit those shots. And Bryce is going to struggle for this team. We have seen him last season. Early on in the season, we saw a very similar thing. People were calling him too old, too slow. A lot of things were sort of being said about Bryce and obviously the whole Perth Wildcats organisation, with obviously JR, our boy, asking a lot of people to sort of get him sacked and all that sort of stuff as well. So it's going to come down to a number of different things, I think, personally. The most important thing is the fact that they actually get some consistency together. So Dylan Windler didn't play on the weekend, like Jez said, and Ty Webster. Now, when we're looking at probably, not the most impactful players, but probably the most important players, those two guys would be in the top 3 or 4 for the Perth Wildcats when we look back for this whole season. So, I've got one stat now. The thing that with the Perth Wildcats have struggled over the last couple of seasons is rebounding, and I think it's one thing that they've sort of worked on, and you sort of saw a bit of a shift from game 1 to game 2. But the way the media was putting it out there, when I actually went and looked at the stats for the Melbourne United game where Perth Wildcats lost 68-97, the eye test did tell me, watching that game live, the fact that the Perth Wildcats looked like they got killed on the rebounds. But realistically, they were only outscored on the rebounds, or out-rebounded 48-43. So it wasn't as damning as what it probably looked like, but it just looked like Melbourne United were everywhere and the Perth Wildcats were struggling to even get into an offensive set and really looked out of place as well. So it's a bit of a tough one because they're really trying to integrate, obviously, Todd Withers and even Elijah Pepper as well to a certain extent in the starting lineup. They won't be obviously long-term starters. What they're trying to do right now is settle the bench with obviously Hiram Harris going back to the bench there and really starting to assert him into that backup lineup. So that when Dylan Windler and obviously Ty Webster come back in, it looks like they're going to be the starting one and the starting three. But massive shout out to Christian Doolittle. I thought he had a tremendous week. He just looks like such a strong leader. The game against the Tasmanian JackJumpers, he is just so physically demanding and strong. Will Magnay was even struggling against this guy as well, which is a massive credit, obviously, to Christian Doolittle. So, obviously, a disappointing week for the Perth Wildcats in a lot of reasons, but at the end of the day, I think there's still some positives to take out of it, and obviously they're going to have a massive season and a massive play in NBL 25.
There is no doubt about that. They are a great franchise. Now, boys, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will preview the first game of round 4. Okay, boys, we are back, and it is time to preview Illawarra and Tasmania. Now, Jez, it's our teams against each other here, the Hawks and the JackJumpers. I want to throw to you first. What are you laughing at, Josh? Don't you sneak it.
36ers aren't playing, are they? I didn't see them playing.
I knew it was coming.
I thought you'd jump onto the 36ers after they won 2 games last week. But,
Yeah, well, maybe.
Especially beating the Hawks as well, mate. Come on.
Yeah.
Got them in my back pocket. We'll see how this week turns out. Jez, the JackJumpers are struggling on the scoring end this season. How do you see this matchup kind of playing out?
Yeah, it's going to be tough, if I'm honest. I'm a little bit worried about this matchup for a lot of reasons. But, yeah, bringing up the scoring first, it's been a really tough start for the JackJumpers. I think even harder than what you would have expected. But, like, they're ranked last in, obviously, total points scored. But it's because they're missing their shots. There's a lot of shots just... Like, they seem just sort of forced and rushed. They're not getting to their areas. I think they're expecting big shots to be made all the time instead of just doing the basics and getting their guys just that little bit of space and little bit of time. And everything's just riding on the waves, I think, of mostly Milton Doyle and Jordan Crawford, which is, I guess, what you would have expected at the start of the year. But if these guys are going on some runs at the start of the games, and that's why they're falling so far behind. And then, they've done obviously an amazing job to be in a lot of these games where that they've thrown away at the start because their shooting's just been awful. They ranked 10th with, and this isn't a 3-point percentage here. This is a field goal percentage of 39.3. You're not going to win games. You're going to struggle to stay in games if you're shooting like that. And then shooting 27.4 from 3-point line. So, it's really, really tough, and they've got to work it out. They've got to work out, okay, what do we need to do to get some more points on the board? Because you can't expect your defense to win your games like it has done over, it did against Melbourne and it did against Perth, because you're going to end up in these massive, massive holes. And this matchup, I think it's going to be crazy. I think Darius Days is a really, really big danger for Tasmania in this one, because I think Froling and Magnay are going to go head-to-head. Aldrich is also going to be in there. So Magnay's going to have his hands full trying to, hold the fort down low. And then you've got Darius Days on top of that coming in or being able to shoot. And he had a little bit of a rough week last week and missed a few 3-pointers. So he's dangerous, because if he moves in and can attack down low and then also find space for himself to shoot and hit a few threes, he's going to be really, really tough and could have a really big game and really change it for the Illawarra Hawks in this.
Now, Josh, the 3 ball I see is something that's important here. And I'm just going to bring up some stats. Tassie were restricted Perth. So Bryce Cotton, Withers and Doolittle went a combined 3 for 21, and the JackJumpers won the game. Cairns only shot 19 shots from 3, but they hit 8 of them. So a really low attempts, but a high percentage, and the Taipans won the game. Illawarra have that ability to open up the floor, create space, and they have quite a few guys that can knock down the 3 ball. Do you think that Tassie will be able to defend them on the perimeter, or do Illawarra have the advantage there?
Yeah, I've struggled to really read into this game. When I was sort of doing a bit of a thing for this game, I wrote offense versus defense, which is what Jez has touched on perfectly. But outside of that, I just think it's really going to come down to actually matchups for myself personally. So, the first one that I'm going to touch on is obviously the point guard matchup of two streaky players in Tyler Harvey and Jordan Crawford. So necessarily this battle will come down, I think, to three-point shooting, because that's what these guys both do. They're not very good at getting into the paint. I think Tyler Harvey, with his size, obviously is a little bit better than obviously Jordan Crawford. But, Harvey's averaging 17 points, 2.3 assists, and then Crawford's averaging 12.8 points and 2.3 assists. So, that matchup is going to be important, because I think for this team to win, we've touched on obviously, throughout these sort of previews and obviously the start of the season as well, that we all believe that Jordan Crawford is the most important player for this team to have any sort of success. He's really got to average between 15 and 20 points, you would say, for this team to have any chance at winning another NBL championship, because they're not getting enough out of other guys. So, I don't necessarily think it's a three-point shot. I just think it's the percentage shots, which is the most important thing, because what I think Tassie are giving up this year, which you haven't really seen in other seasons, is if you move the ball around quite fast, they're not set defensively, and you're going to find yourself open shots or even open lanes to the basket as well. So it's a really intriguing matchup, I think, because this has got all the potential to be another Cairns Taipans game for the Tasmania JackJumpers, where they come in, they shoot really, really high percentages and absolutely get blown out of the water, and, was over in the first quarter realistically. So it's going to be a really, really impressive sort of game. I think it's going to be important for the JackJumpers to slow down Trey Kell as well, because like I mentioned off the top, he has really been in an MVP sort of start to the season, 22 points per game, 3.5 assists. And I think the matchup for him is going to be a mixture of obviously Milton Doyle as well as Craig Sword as well, who are both averaging very, very good steal numbers to start the season and have obviously got some good defensive ratings to them as well. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. I haven't been able to sort of put my finger on who I think is going to win, because they are pretty much the most polar opposites that you'll get in the NBL. And, the old saying is obviously defense does win championships. So if you go on by that, you'd probably be tending to choose with the Tasmanian JackJumpers. But, wow, the Illawarra Hawks are very much an exciting team in the NBL, aren't they, boys?
Yeah, 100%. Defense wins championships, but shooting can win you games. So I'm I'm thinking Illawarra in this one. But Jez, you are looking a little bit at the Froling and Magnay matchup, and you think that's going to be important in this one?
Yeah, well, I think we just sort of, it is going to be huge. It's two of the best, say, Australian centers in the NBL going head to head. Two guys that are really starting to make a big name for themselves and a bit of noise. Obviously, Magnay has some noise around the NBA, and I don't think Froling's too far off it as well. But like we saw in the Adelaide win, the battle down low against the Hawks, like it was just huge. It was like Adelaide just seemed to shut them out a little bit. And contain that whole low presence that everybody was talking about in the first 2 weeks. But I'm not sure that Tasmania have the depth to do that. I don't think personally that Magnay can do all of that on his own, and you're going to be sort of relying on guys like Drimich and Deng to help out there. And I'm not sure that they're at the quality to be able to contain everything that Illawarra can throw at them. So, yeah, like I said, I'm worried about this one. And, if we're doing our tipping properly, I'm also definitely leaning towards the Hawks here. And, which is a shame. I am very, very nervous about the start that Tasmania have had. And I think a lot has to do with it, like the questions we said. It's going to be tough with scoring, and it's going to be tough with the depth that they have down low after losing Marcus Lee. So...
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, because I've been a big believer, obviously, in Sam Froling, but the more that these years go on, I just don't understand why he's not putting on the size that obviously these other big centers have got, because that's his only flaw. When we're looking at a guy like this, I actually think a little bit the opposite. I think Magnay is going to walk all over Sam Froling, because he's just such a physically imposing guy. And, if you're looking at a matchup that may win the Tasmanian JackJumpers a game, this is a game and a matchup that Will Magnay could walk out with 22 to 25 points and 12 to 15 rebounds, and that's no joke because, I don't think on the opposite end they've got obviously the depth. I think the Illawarra Hawks have got a bigger depth and obviously a really nice core, but, Will Magnay is probably the most ferocious and dangerous centres in the game when he's on song. So, yeah, I think this could be a matchup where if you're trying to obviously playing devil's advocate here, trying to tip the Tasmanian JackJumpers to see if they can get a game and win this game, I think that's the matchup that they've really got to attack, because one thing you saw in overtime on the weekend against the Perth Wildcats, when they threw the ball into Magnay twice in that overtime period, they got 2 buckets out of him because he's just so strong. And that was on Christian Doolittle, that was on Keanu Pinder, who are very strong men as well, who I even liken them to probably a little bit more than a Sam Froling personally. So, that's going to be the matchup that I think could win the Illawarra Hawks, the Tasmanian JackJumpers this game. And yeah, if you're an Illawarra Hawks fan, you'd be a little bit nervous, I think, personally.
Yeah, what do you think that they can do to also contain Darius Days? What the Tasmania? Where's that matchup there that's going to be beneficial for the JackJumpers to win?
I've seen a bit of a different side to Darius Days over this last week, and I think it's more they've made him into a bit more of a shooter, I feel like, the Illawarra Hawks, which is weird to me because he looked like he was at his best when they were throwing the ball into him on the post and he was backing down and sort of hitting those fadeaways and all that sort of stuff as well. But I think with the resurgence of Trey Kell, to be honest with you guys, and I guess his importance to this team, the ball's in his hands a lot more than any other player. And then obviously when the ball goes to Tyler Harvey's hands, it doesn't move much at all. When it goes to Sam Froling's, he backs down. So it's starting to be a little bit of a problem, I think, and they've got to really nip it in the bud because Darius Days' best sort of play style is when they're playing fast up the court, and obviously they give him the ball and make him be allowed to playmate to a sense as well. So yeah, I'm not too certain. Obviously, I think you could play a lot of switching with Darius Days. I don't think it's got to be one person. I think you could put Sword on him, Doyle on him. You could even put Drimic on him. I think even Majuk Den would be a nice matchup for him as well. I think there's enough guys that can contain him to a certain extent, if obviously the Illawarra Hawks don't use him the right way, which we saw in those first couple of games. So he went from a guy who looked like he was going to be a 20-10 guy to now a guy who might be a 10-10 guy. So, still great statistics, but I think he's got the ability to absolutely rip this league apart, and it's going to be up to Justin Tatum to see how they get the best out of him every single week and every single game.
Well, on that subject as well, I'm going to leave you guys with some numbers. I love getting into the stats. That's what I do. The Tasmania JackJumpers have the most fouls of any team per game, and the Illawarra Hawks, they are fouled the third most of any team. So we've spoken about Magnay and his foul trouble, and then the depth of the big men on the Tasmanian JackJumpers to match up against the Hawks. Fouls could be a very big problem here. Now, Josh, it is time. Maybe, just maybe, you've got me here. It's Guess Who.
Yeah, I think I've definitely got you here, mate. I wrote in the notes, good luck, Ryan. That's the only thing I wrote at the top of the list here. Now, I'm obviously heading over to America, and I've written down a couple of states and I guess a couple of, whatever you want to call them, counties or whatever they call them over in America. Obviously, American listeners to be able to, I guess, give us a bit more of an insight into that. But now I'm thinking of a player who played college in one of these states where I'm heading over on holiday. So Las Vegas, Portland, Tahoe, Reno, and Nashville are the 5 colleges that this guy could have played for in his professional or in his college basketball times. Now, this season, he's shooting currently 40% from the field. He grew up in Melbourne, Australia, and he's what I would say a sharp shooting player. Now, who am I is the big question, but we're going to go to a quick little break and we're going to hear the boys' first thoughts and then obviously get their guesses as well. So, yes, got their first thoughts here, I should say, boys. I meant to say thoughts. Now, what are you guys thinking? I'm going to start with Jez here because I think Ryan obviously does a little bit better than Jez. No, I'm not going to start with Jez. All right, we'll kick it off to Ryan then, mate. Give us a little bit of insight into who you think it is and maybe why as well.
Well, mate, I love these little questions, the Guess Who's, because it gives me an opportunity to do some sleuthing on the internet. And so the first stat I kind of looked at was, 40% or more from the field. There's 38 players that fit the bill this season. And I tried to put all those names into ChatGPT and get... first was birthplaces. I misread the question. You said grew up in Melbourne. Don't necessarily have been born in Melbourne. So I then took away a heap of American-born players. That maybe was wrong. A few imports were out, ones that I knew. I took away also quite a few players that I didn't class as sharpshooters. And then I was down to 21, or I think I actually went down to 19 players. And then I just hit Google and tried looking for early life kind of information. Mate, I could not find this player. The person that I thought was closest was Matthew Dellavedova, but he didn't grow up in Melbourne. He grew up in regional Victoria. So, mate, I'm at a loss.
Interesting. What about yourself, Jez? What are your thoughts?
I'm not even in the vicinity. I'm just trying to have a stab in the dark and see what my luck is.
Throw a name out, mate. Any name.
Jack White.
Jack White. Ooh, alrighty. Not very close at all, boys. Now, the player that I'm thinking of is a guy who plays for the Sydney Kings. So he's a Sydney Kings player. Now, he is currently averaging 9 points per game with a shooting percentage of 57%. Now, he played at Portland College or Portland University, whatever you want to call it over there in America, the University of Portland, where he averaged 16.9 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and shot the three ball at 37% throughout his little senior season there as well. Now, this guy is a sharpshooter, and it's not up for conjecture at all, but the guy that I'm thinking of is Tyler Robertson of the Sydney Kings. That is the guy who is the Guess Who of the week.
Hold on a minute.
No, here we go.
What? Again? He's not
Tyler
playing this
Robertson.
year or what?
Yeah.
Tyler Robertson, yes, he is. The Sydney Kings.
But he's
What did you say his field goal percentage was?
57%.
57%.
I mean, he's not on the NBL stats page, Stats Hub at least.
But that is it, boys. That is wrapping up the Guess Who for the week. Now, obviously, you guys might have to start to figure out that you got to go a little bit deeper into these stats now, boys, maybe.
Well, if he's not on the NBL page, he doesn't exist. So that's I'm calling that one a draw.
That's a massive thing. The NBL, they're sort of, I spoke about this on Higgins' Hot Takes, they've got to really step up their department over the next couple of weeks in a lot of different factors, and the app is definitely one of them. So get that sorted, NBL. But Tyler Robertson is the Guess Who player. He's averaging 9 points, 1 assist, 2 rebounds, and shooting 57% from the field in NBL 25. But let's get into game number 2's previews, I'd say, boys.
Let's do that. It is Sydney versus Cairns, and a game that probably, a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, you would have looked at this and said, yeah, what else is going on? But now this is shaping up as a really interesting matchup, and it's going to have, not implications. We're still so far out from the postseason, but around ladder positions just this early in the season. Jez, I want to go to you first. You have looked a bit about how the coaching of Sydney Kings and Brian Goorjian has affected this Sydney lineup, and then what kind of experience he'll bring with him to try and combat Taran Armstrong.
Yeah, well, I think Sydney's a better defensive team. I think when you look at the stats, it doesn't really show. I think they're averaging pretty close to the same amount of points against that they were at the end of last year. Well, they were before last round. I remember checking that out when I was looking at sort of the Brisbane matchup. But I think they are a much more defensively structured team. That's what Gorge sort of brings. He brings that, a little bit more of a defensive style of play. But when you have all these superstars, they're also going to score points. But I think the big thing that sort of, in the defense of anyone that played Cairns last week was they were pretty unknown. Nobody really... You don't have the same tape. You don't have the same idea of how they were going to play. It was an extremely unknown situation with Taran Armstrong coming in and nobody really knowing, all right, how are Cairns going to gel? How is everything going to be run? What impact is Taran Armstrong going to have on their offense and even on their defense? And now it's bloody huge. Like, he was absolutely unbelievable over the weekend and everything runs through him. And I think now Sydney are going to have, when this game comes around, Sydney will have 3 games to look at where Taran Armstrong has been in charge. So I think that is a really, really major benefit to Sydney compared to the teams that played them, Melbourne and Tasmania, last week. So that is absolutely a benefit for them. And I think these matchups are going to be really, really interesting. How you shut down Armstrong is going to be huge. But I think you've got Jalen Adams there, you've got Tui, you've got Cole. I think this perimeter matchup is going to be a big one. Like we've mentioned when we talked about both of these teams, the 3-point shooting is huge for both of them, and their success rate is it's a little bit different. Cairns make sure they get good looks and they hit them, where Sydney go the opposite and play the numbers game and shoot a lot. So it's going to be a huge matchup, and it's going to be interesting to see if Cairns can hold this pace from last week.
Now, Josh, you were looking at the defense of these teams, and both of them ranking top 5. Do you see this as more of a kind of a defensive battle rather than a shootout, or how do you see this game?
No, definitely. I see this as a shootout, as Jez was sort of talking about there. And I want to go a little bit further, obviously, on some of his statistics there. So the Sydney Kings average a league high 78 shots per game compared to a league low in the Cairns Taipans averages of 67.8. So they're putting up 10 extra shots per game. That comes down to a lot of things. They're a transitional team. They crash the O-boards very, very hard, and they give themselves really good looks. But on the opposite end, though, I just think the biggest thing with the Cairns Taipans is the fact that they're not afraid to obviously be able to shoot the 3-point shot. And realistically, I don't think they're not afraid. They're not afraid, obviously, as well to drive the basketball as well. So that could be somewhat a bit of a question there against the Sydney Kings. When we're looking at defenses, like you mentioned there, they're both obviously top 5 teams in defense, allowing the Sydney Kings allow 89.8 points per game to the Cairns Taipans 91.3. And it really does come down to, I guess, when we're looking at 3-point shooting, looking at obviously how they defend the 3-point shot. Now, the Cairns Taipans allow their opponents to only shoot 33% from the 3-point line, which is a pretty strong statistic when you are looking at it, because especially when the Sydney Kings want to just shoot 3-point shots purely and give themselves the best shot by just trying to shoot teams out of the park, that could really help out this team tremendously as well. So it's going to be an interesting game, though, because I think it does come down to who can be more efficient. I think who gets the most shots at the right spots. I personally think, as good as the Sydney Kings are, their flaws are the fact that they don't really have the number one guy who can, sort of set their team up. I think Xavier Cooks tries to take the ball out of Jalen Adams' hands too much for my liking. I think you've got to really let the play flow through Jalen Adams instead of Xavier Cooks. I'm not afraid, obviously, for Cooks to have the ball sometimes, but at the end of the day, though, I think Jalen Adams is the star player and the leader on this team, and Xavier Cooks is the guy who's got to sort of play in transition and really have those high sort of comments, those high sort of rebound sort of statistics and all that sort of stuff as well. So, it's going to be an interesting matchup for sure, but I want to get into the key matchups in a sec.
Yeah, I think it is. It's really interesting to see what happened with Jalen Adams last week. Like he took 6 shots the whole game. He scored 2 points. Do you think I wonder if it was just about, obviously, the tactic they played against Brisbane, they were very in control. I think, for me, we're going to expect a much more busy week from Jalen Adams this week, and a little bit less ball going to Xavier Cooks. Just purely on the weight of these matchups. I think the more we see these tighter, big games for Sydney, we'll see the ball in Jalen Adams' hands more. And then when it's sort of these run-over games where they are in control and find a really good matchup down low, they're obviously going to they have the opportunity to dish it to another MVP caliber player in Xavier Cooks. So that's the benefit that they do have. And it will just be interesting to see, okay, what is working, because maybe they shut down Jalen Adams, they double him, he's not going to get any good looks, then they have to put the ball through Xavier Cooks. But it could be the opposite way around. Maybe Tanner Groves, that matchup's going to be really, really interesting as well, I think, of how hard he can hold firm down low and control the rebounds and take some of these big numbers away from Xavier Cooks. He's pretty much averaging a double-double a game at the moment, 21.5 points, I think 9.5 assists. So if Groves can be strong, obviously not marking up maybe directly on him, but I think he's going to play a really, really big role. And I think Jalen Adams, if he can find his rhythm, then he's going to be that big threat for Sydney in this one.
Yeah, definitely. I think the matchup, you've got them right to a certain extent, I think, personally, but, I think that's the way it's going to go. But I actually think Kyron Galloway is the better matchup for Xavier Cooks in my mind, because I think Galloway's got a little bit more speed. I think, obviously, a guy like Groves is one you sort of stick in the paint, and he's a bit of a rim protector, and he's a very slow sort of big man in a sense. And I think you've got to have a very versatile sort of power forward to be able to counteract, obviously, Xavier Cooks. And I think the Cairns Taipans have got a couple of them. They've got AK Gack and Kyron Galloway, who I think are nearly perfect for this position and this role. So I would look for those two to obviously match up on Xavier Cooks. It's going to be interesting with Taron Armstrong and Jalen Adams, because they're two guys who are very, very quick. They're the leaders of their team. They've got a lot of good things going for them. And then the key matchup for me, though, personally, is Bulkwall taking on his old team and new import Rob Edwards, because Edwards has probably nearly been one of the most informed players in the NBL, especially last round. But even this season, I think he's leading the league in points per game. He's been doing an amazing amount of work for the Cairns Taipans, but Bulkwall can definitely really hold up against a good guy like him, because at the end of the day, Rob Edwards is just a gun. So I'm excited to see this matchup. There's a couple of guys who have played, obviously, for the Cairns Taipans who are at the Sydney Kings and vice versa as well. And it's going to be an interesting matchup, because we know what Adam Ford's like. He doesn't back down to anyone, and he's going to have to be coaching up against one of the greatest coaches of all times in Brian Goorjian.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that Edwards-Quoll matchup as well. I spoke about Quoll a lot in the preseason about his defensive prowess and how he came out in the media and said, I want to be the best defensive player in the NBL. And with Rob Edwards' kind of offensive power so far this season, this is shaping up to be a really exciting matchup. And I hope they don't stagger the rotations too much, so we get a bit of that one-on-one basketball up top. So
foul troubles are going to be important, though, Ryan. Like,
definitely.
If Bull Quell goes out there, and I think Adam Ford knows Bull's weaknesses, and if he goes out there and tries to sort of bait him into some early fouls to get him in trouble, we could see that matchup really open for Rob Edwards, and we might see a different story. But I think you're about to touch on tips. I've actually gone for the Cairns Taipans here, mate. I think they'll get the job done over the Sydney Kings, and I think they'll actually win this game, because I think they match up a little bit better. But obviously, it might be one of those things, obviously, with hindsight, with round 3 done, we might be sort of overriding, I guess, the Cairns Taipans a little bit. But I've got the Cairns Taipans win this one, mate.
So you're backing the Cairns Taipans to win twice when they beat Perth earlier in the round, or what?
I'm not sure, but we'll see. We'll see. We'll check out the betting previews later on, I reckon. But
can't beat Perth, who are like the bottom of the table, but they'll beat Sydney, who come in like
Probably.
Perth are the best team. We're not the NBL's light boys. Come on, what are we talking about? But yeah.
It is time now for our last segment of the show. It's the Basketball Fix MVP. So, as we have done in previous shows, we'll give our MVP votes. Well, that was very difficult to get out from the previous round. 3, 2, 1 votes, and Josh tallies these up as we go throughout the season, and we will award this to a player come finals time. Now, guys, straight off the bat, I think that we've spoken a lot in this episode about Adelaide 36ers and the Cairns Taipans. For me, there are two players in these teams that have played spectacularly and have driven their teams to these victories. But I'm interested, before I divulge the names that I'm thinking about, I'm going to throw to you, Josh, and say, who are you thinking about in these 3, 2, 1s?
Yeah, so I've written down the 3, 2, 1s that I've got that are going to be going towards our tallies, and I'll say them now if you guys are happy for me to do that, and then I'll leave it up to you guys to discuss, obviously, what you guys are thinking, if you guys agree or if you guys disagree. So obviously the 1 means they're getting 1 vote, and the 3 means that they'll get 3 votes towards our end of season tipping for anyone that's new to the show. Now, the 1 vote's going to Xavier Cooks. So he had 23.7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals and 1 block in a really good win against the Brisbane Bullets there. I think was an instrumental part to their team. Now, you've mentioned 2 guys there, mate, and I'm going to throw them both in there. Now, I've got Taron Armstrong with the 2 votes. I think obviously he's important to the team. His statistics weren't as good, obviously, as Kendrick Davis's, but his round was just as good as anyone else there. And I've let the name slip of who we're giving the 3 votes to, but the 3 votes will be awarded to Kendrick Davis. Olgun Ulich's man as well, so he'll get 3 votes after a monster couple of games there, where I think he scored like 53 points or something it was over the round between the 2 games, dominated both of those teams. So yeah, I'll leave it up to you guys now. Have a bit of a discussion, tell me what you guys think, and if you disagree, let me know as well.
I think it's a little bit Supercoach bias, this this point system, to be honest.
We can throw Will Magno if you want in there, mate, for yourself.
No, I think we'll leave that one this week at least. Maybe next week or the week after. But no, I think you're spot on. It was a bit of a toss of the coin, I think. Obviously, Davis's stats were that little bit better. But you've got to sort of that instant impact that Taran Armstrong had on Cairns is got to rate very, very highly up there. And yeah, coming out in that first game and just going absolutely bonkers and going, all right, boys, I'm here. I'm in the NBL. Everybody watch out. And it wasn't just on offense. I felt that he was extremely strong defensively as well. He was really working to get back. You saw him just getting in the face of shooters and causing an absolute ruckus. I was quite surprised that he had less blocks and less steals than he actually did. By watching those games, I felt like he was much more involved defensively than what the stats said. So I think, it was just a huge week. It's gonna be really, really good to see how this season works out for Taran Armstrong, because like I think we mentioned in the previews, this is a career-defining season in NBL 25 for Taran Armstrong, and can really project his career to being a great Australian basketball player and obviously moving on to the NBA. So yeah, good luck to him, and I hope he just keeps this pace up, because it'd be great to see, and he's very well deserving.
Well, there we have it. Kendrick Davis with the 3, Taran Armstrong with the 2, and Xavier Cooks, Derek Rucker's top-rated player preseason gets the 1 vote. Josh shakes his head in the background. Had to slip that one in.
Unreal.
Well, we've reached the end of another Beyond the Buzzer show. Boys, it's been a great hit out this week. Josh, you're heading off to the US, but we will be sure to get our episodes in. And hopefully you can get some American flavour on to the Beyond the Buzzer. But Jez, what can our listeners and viewers expect from the Basketball Fix over the coming weeks?
Yeah, well, definitely over the next coming days, we will be, or maybe even before this episode even gets aired, we will have our Supercoach episode up. It's definitely, we're getting some really strong positive feedback on that. So if you are a Supercoach fan, it is definitely worth the listen, and even checking it out on YouTube. You can check out most of our episodes up on YouTube. And then don't forget to go through the Basketball Fix website and check things out there, where we're putting up individual game previews. We'll be throwing up some interesting articles as well, keeping up to date with some of the news and hot topics as best as we can with the time that we have. So yeah, be sure to check all that out. And Friday's Path to Pro with our main man, Ryan, who looks at the big topics of these next stars, which is obviously a big part of the NBL and its growth. So check us out on all the channels, Insta, Facebook, and on YouTube. That's all from us. Ryan, are you going to give us the line that we all wait for?
Well, before I do that, Josh, just tell us the where they can find us on the socials.
Yeah, make sure you go out on Instagram and check us out, the Basketball Fix podcast, and make sure you give us a follow there. It's starting to boom over there now, getting a lot of engagement, obviously a lot of people joining onto the Basketball Fix bandwagon, and we're looking forward to obviously having you guys on with us as well as we further our journey into taking over the NBL media landscape.
That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dignitaries, we hope you have gotten your Basketball Fix.
With stars come to play. He's the biggest of them all. Step back, 4-3. Phoenix forced a turnover at halfway.